Welcome to the Nebraska Department of Education's Making It Stick Professional Development webinar series. I'm Dr. Michael Quinn, and I'll be your host for Module 10, Question-Answer Relationships. Have you ever read a book with a group, maybe your friends or a book club, discussed it, and discovered that there were more layers to the story? Then, after your discussion, you realized that others walked away with something completely different. You were filled with questions, wonder, and maybe even wanted to read the book again? Us too. The Question-Answer Relationships webinar will take 35 minutes. Throughout this module, we built in some learner engagement activities to ensure your comprehension. When you see the pencil icon, you'll be asked to pause, reflect, engage, and write in your viewing guide. Feel free to stop, start, and rewind as needed. After you complete the module, we'll ask you a few quick questions to see if we've helped you meet the lesson's objectives. Let's get started. Here's our webinar's umbrella question. How can question-answer relationships, QARs, help students understand texts and support higher-level thinking across content areas? Because we want to extract a deeper meaning from all texts. First, we'll explore the question-answer relationship strategy. Second, we'll examine levels of questions within the framework. Third, we will practice crafting questions at each level. Then, we will align QARs to Bloom's taxonomy. Then, we will discuss strategies for incorporating QAR thinking across content areas. Finally, we will explore the benefits of QAR as a test preparation tool. After this webinar, you'll be able to empower students to think beyond the text they are reading. By yourself, take some time to reflect on the questions you're currently asking your students. How are questions used as a tool for thinking and learning in your classroom? Please pause the video for a moment and think about how you currently use questions to check for understanding. If you're able, share with your colleagues. Press play when you're ready to resume. QARs are a research-based approach for improving comprehension. Question-answer relationships make explicit to students the relationships that exist among the types of questions asked, the text, and their prior knowledge. In the process of teaching QARs, you help students become aware of and skilled when using learning strategies to find the information they need to comprehend at different levels of response to the text. The language of QAR and the accessibility of underlying concepts provide teachers with the way to meet the rising expectations for higher levels of thinking in increasingly diverse schools. QARs teach students to decipher and categorize 4 different types of questions, so they have a better understanding of where and how to answer those questions. QARs empower students to connect and to make sense of the text they are reading, thus improving reading comprehension and challenges them to think beyond the text. It inspires students to think creatively and activates literal and critical thinking skills. Bonus! This system of framing questions has been shown to boost test scores. Let's take a look at the 4 types of questions. Right there and think and search are explicit questions, meaning the answer can be found in the text. Author and me and on my own are implicit, meaning that the answer is outside of the text and must be formulated by also using what the reader knows. Right there, questions contain wording directly from the text, with an answer often found in a single sentence. Think and search questions are derived directly from the text, but the answer must be formulated across more than one sentence. Right there and think and search are contrasted to convey the difference between successfully answering a question by simply going to one place in a text and finding all necessary information and looking across a text or set of texts to answer the question. Author and me questions require readers to use both information learned in the text and his or her own background knowledge to answer. On my own questions require the reader to use prior knowledge to answer. The text may also be needed. Neither an author and me nor an on my own question can be answered with only information from the text. You must make it clear to students that in order to answer an author and me question, readers must have read and understood the text. To answer an on my own question, readers can rely solely on their background knowledge. It is helpful to separate these 4 questions as book questions and brain questions. Right there and think and search questions are book questions because the answers can be found directly in the text. While author and me and on my own are brain questions because the reader must consider what they know and what they learned from the reading. Please take a moment to read an excerpt from a recent Catapult Learning blog titled Swinging for Greatness: How Motivation and Mindset Impact Student Achievement, and a few sample questions that follow in your viewing guide. Pause the video while you read and sort the questions into QAR categories. Press play when you're ready to resume. Did you categorize the questions this way? Why or why not? When students are asked to identify the QAR category, they sometimes disagree. Keep in mind that the goal of the QAR framework is for students to be reflective about information sources and about strategies they can use to obtain information. The goal is beyond simply labeling questions. Since the knowledge held by individuals varies, the emphasis should always be placed on the student's ability to justify their choice of QAR, rather than simply making the same QAR choice as the teacher. Let's take a closer look at each type of question. The reader only needs basic, literal thinking to answer a right-there question. For both fiction and nonfiction texts, this may include answering questions using information explicitly stated in the text source, such as a magazine, textbook, web page, or graph to define a term, providing facts and supporting details. For literary works, it may include identifying information about characters or a setting, or determining a sequence of events found in one place in the text. For informational texts, it may include identifying explicitly stated information about topic sentences, determining an author's purpose, explaining a causal relationship, or locating specific information in charts and graphs. The purpose of students creating or responding to right-there questions is to make them aware of the important details that support key ideas in the text. Simply finding the details is often a challenge for them. Unfortunately, too many students choose rereading as their sole strategy for answering right-there questions, when in fact, they also need to learn to use scanning effectively, develop note-taking strategies, and learn to draw on specific context clues. Right there, question stems often begin with, according to the passage, how many, who is, what is, identify, list, define. Like right there questions, readers only need literal thinking to answer think and search QAR questions. This level of question asks readers to put information together from a single text or from a set of texts, looking across sentences, paragraphs, pages, or text for all the information needed to answer questions fully. Certain words, including pointer signal words, plurals, and conjunctions, indicate that the answer is in more than one place. These questions require students to integrate information, including using multiple text sources to explain the relationships between problems and solutions, or causes and effects, providing information about a sequence of events across chapters in a literary text or across chapter sections in an informational text, and comparing or connecting information within and across texts. To successfully handle a think and search question, readers must be able to identify important information, understand how text is organized, and synthesize the information in a meaningful way. Today, we see students experience similar challenges on constructed response items on high-stakes assessments. There are many strategies that can help students with the task demands of think and search questions, such as using visualization strategies, so they can see the sequence of tasks or events relevant to making meaning and using summarization strategies. Think and search question stems often begin with the main idea of the passage. What caused? Compare and contrast. What was the problem and solution? The passage is about. Find evidence to support. Explain. Summarize. Author and me questions require students to use both background knowledge and what they've read to answer the question, as the answer is ambiguous or alluded to in the text. Students must be able to use inferential thinking to respond to the question. Author and me questions prompt students to consider text critically to judge author's craft and technique, evaluate the author's perspective or point of view within or across texts, and take different perspectives in relation to a text. Author and me QARs provide a practical context for helping students understand the importance of comprehension strategies that help them link text information to their own experience. Critical reading requires students to be able to distinguish fact from opinion, visualize settings and events from text that presents only a partial picture, make simple and complex inferences from information that has been presented, make predictions about what may happen next, whether it's in the context of fiction, history, or a science experiment. Make judgments about how they would respond in situations faced by characters in the story they read. Capable readers are expected to make text-to-self connections as well as text-to-theme and text-to-world connections. Critical readers have to be able to integrate what they read with what they know. Author and me question stems often begin with, the author implies, the passage suggests, the character feels. What can you conclude? To answer an on my own question, readers can rely solely on their background knowledge. Although the question may relate to the text, the answer may be found outside the text. Readers need to use their own ideas and experiences to respond to the question. You understand how important it is for students to think about what they know before they read and connect to the content they are learning. Posing on my own questions as a pre-reading activity can help students make text-to-self connections and activate prior knowledge of the concept or topic they are learning. On my own questions often start with, in your opinion, based on your experience, do you believe? What would you do if? Notice that the word you appears in every stem. If you use Bloom's taxonomy to develop and align your objectives and assessments, you may be wondering how QARs fit into that framework. Right there, questions are at the lowest level of Bloom's. As mentioned earlier, they are basic recall questions. Think and search questions may require different levels of cognitive thinking, understanding, and applying. Author and me questions may also vary at levels of demand. Finally, on my own questions often fall at the highest levels of Bloom's and invite students to use the skills of evaluating and creating when constructing a response. It is important to keep in mind, however, that this system of alignment is unfixed. You may ask a think and search question that requires students to critique or evaluate, just as you may ask an on my own question that asks students to think at other levels. By yourself, take some time to craft 4 questions for Bell's theatrical realities. Please pause the video for a moment and use one of our suggested stems to craft a new content area question. If time allows, write 4 more with an original stem. Press play when you're ready to resume. One of the many benefits of QARs are their applicability across grade levels and content areas. When creating QAR instructional plans, there are a few factors to consider. What do your students already know about QARs? What are your end-of-the-year goals for your students? At what point in the school year is QAR being introduced and used? If students are unfamiliar with the QAR strategy, it is worth several days' effort to teach students the relationship between questions and answers. These 5 steps have been modified from Raphael's QAR instructional model for content area classrooms. The first step is to introduce the concept of a QAR. Display a chart containing a description of the 4 basic question-answer relationships. Point out the 2 broad categories of information sources, in the text and in your head. Next, assign students several short passages of text, 2 to 5 sentences max in length. Follow each reading with 1 question from each of the QAR categories. Then discuss the differences between a right there question and answer, a think and search question and answer, an on your own question and answer, and an author and me question and answer. Your explanation should be clear and complete. Reinforce the discussion by assigning several more short text passages and asking a question for each. Continue by practicing with short passages. Use one question for each QAR category per passage. First, give students a passage to read along with questions and answers and identified QARs. Discuss why the questions and answers represent one QAR instead of another. Next, give students a passage along with questions and answers, but this time ask them to identify the QAR for each. Finally, give students passages. Decide together what strategy to use and have them write their responses. Then, assign a longer passage with up to 6 questions, at least one from each of the 4 QAR categories. First, have students work in groups to decide the QAR category for each question and the answers for each. Next, assign a second passage, comparable in length, with 5 questions for students to work on individually. Discuss their responses either in small groups or with the whole class. Teachers of math and other technical content may be questioning how the QAR strategy can be applied to their content area. Think about the types of reading students must do in your classes. In addition to reading lengthy word problems, students are also expected to read and interpret a variety of graphics, such as tables, charts, pictures, line graphs, and bar graphs. You may find that some students overlook important details of the graphics, treat irrelevant data as relevant, fail to pay close attention to the questions before turning to the graphic to find the answer, or expect to find the answer to be displayed in plain sight without requiring any interpretation or problem solving. QAR can encourage students to be more savvy interpreters of graphics. Teach them the QAR strategy following the 5 steps we reviewed, using graphics as your text. Then ask them to follow these steps when solving problems. Read the question. Review the graphic. Reread the question. Choose a QAR that matches the question in the problem. Answer the question. Read the question. Review the graphic. Reread the question. Choose a QAR that matches the question in the problem. Answer the question. Let's try it. First, read the question. According to the graph, which of the following is true about the relationship between the number of goals made and attempted? Next, look at the graphic. Now go back and reread the question. Pause the video and complete the 4th and final steps with a partner. Choose a QAR that matches the question and explains your choice. Finally, answer the question. Did you pick answer D? You're correct. You should have labeled this as a think and search question. Here's why. Students have all the information required to answer this question in the graphic. However, they must pay careful attention to multiple pieces of data. First, they have to note the relationship between age and the goals. As age increases, so do the number of goals made and attempted. Then students have to differentiate between the lines representing the numbers of goals made and those attempted. They must understand that players always attempt more goals than they make. Finally, students must deduce the relationship between age, number of goals made, and the number of goals attempted. They must see that these 2 lines get closer together and must understand that this means that as players get older, the ratio of made to attempted goals gets smaller. We've explored how QARs can help students understand what is being asked of them through various levels of questions. We know that in addition to fostering higher-level thinking, QARs prepare students to be better test takers. Now, let's focus on the sciences and how QARs can support scientific thinking. Write their questions promote observation and the consideration of direct evidence. Think and search questions promote seeing relationships among data and seeing patterns across data sets. They encourage the making of reasonable inferences and hypotheses, and a consideration of indirect evidence to make predictions and to theorize. Author and me questions promote creating mental models and extending these for use in altered contexts. They encourage experimentation, intervention, and the creation of new data to add to what is already established or to confirm or disconfirm hypotheses. On my own questions promote the application of scientific concepts and processes, making connections between real-world issues and problems. They encourage the testing of generalizations. In addition to specific content area literacies, we want our students to be critical readers for college, careers, and beyond. Either by yourself or in a group, let's take some time to reflect on careers and how these different QAR strategies can be used to identify and synthesize important information. In which careers would you need to apply each QAR strategy to find information and perform your job on a daily basis? Right there. Think and search. Author and me. On my own. Please pause the video for a moment and connect at least one career to each strategy. For example, which strategy would help a military general perform well versus a librarian? If you're able, share with your colleagues. Press play when you're ready to resume. There are many reasons why we want our students to meet the highest literacy standards. Our democratic society depends on an informed citizenry, one capable of thinking critically, evaluating information, understanding what is explicitly stated and what needs to be inferred, and thinking deeply about what other questions need to be asked. Capable citizens need to be able to interpret what they are reading and draw conclusions based on evidence. We want our students to be able to enjoy high levels of literacy for both personal satisfaction and to achieve success in an increasingly information-based economy. For educators, there is another important reason. Teachers, schools, and districts today are faced with the harsh reality. If their students are unable to perform well on high-stakes tests, the districts, schools, and teachers are held accountable. Teachers are faced with the test preparation dilemma. How do we continue to deliver high-quality instruction without disregarding our responsibility to prepare students for success in high-stakes testing situations? When writing QARs, we can brainstorm and grow the complexity of our question as we read and prepare the lesson. Practice using Bell's Mirror of the World, a new history of art. As you're reading, jot down a question in each category. See if you can generate 4 questions before you finish reading the passage. QAR instruction can be used as a basis for test preparation. It can be used to show students the types of questions they will encounter on high-stakes tests and what form those questions may take. It can be used to demystify how tests work and help students become accustomed to the testing language. It can raise student awareness about which comprehension strategy to employ to correctly answer a question. In an analysis of released test items from several states, Taffy Raphael and her colleagues found that each test item could be placed in one of the core QAR categories, with think and search and author and me questions being the most prevalent. This is encouraging, in that authentic reasons for reading involve making connections within a text, as well as between what we read and our experiences. In your viewing guide, you will find the text Hardwired for Language and a few sample questions, which were taken from the Grade 11 Nebraska State Accountability Reading Practice Exam. The answers have been provided for you. Read each question and determine which level of QAR is used. Then decide which comprehension strategy or strategies facilitate answering the question. Pause the video here. Press play when you're ready to resume. Before we conclude our webinar, let's review the key points. QAR is a reading strategy in which students categorize questions according to where they found the information they needed to answer each question. Students are asked to indicate whether the information they used to answer questions about reading was textually explicit, textually implicit, or information entirely from the student's own prior knowledge. QARs do help students to answer questions, but they also encourage students to independently monitor and assess their text comprehension, as well as promote elaborative and critical thinking. The great thing about QARs is they can be applied to any content area. Further, they give teachers the freedom to draft relevant questions and dig as deep as they want to, jumping between levels. Imagine that you're teaching an exciting new text, your autobiography. Write 4 questions using the following stems. Who is? What caused? The character feels. What would you do if? List one possible answer that your students would give for each stem. Your students' background knowledge is what they know about you thus far and their own life path. For the answers, put yourself in their shoes. All of your questions will be easy to write because you're familiar with the text, so focus on how you will encourage students to independently monitor and assess their text comprehension, promote elaborative and critical thinking, apply these QAR strategies in your grade level and content area. Please pause the video for a moment and take a few minutes to draft your 4 questions and 4 answers. Press play when you're finished. That brings us to the end of our webinar. Please take a moment to fill out our brief survey by visiting the link provided. Thank you for learning with us today.